It's Wildcard Wednesday, maybe my favorite day of the week. Welcome, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Michele Tafoya podcast, the Wildcard Wednesday edition. Oh, we've got great stuff today. So before I go any further, click that subscribe button. Make sure you never miss an episode. We have so many good interviews coming up and so many in the library. Just hit subscribe if you're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Just click subscribe so you never miss an episode. Without further ado, the big story in America yesterday, one of them, because there are so many going on, but this one at the Supreme Court, there is a Maryland case where, I'll just read this. It's called Mahmoud versus Taylor. A coalition of parents sought to solidify the right to be informed and opt their children out of reading LGBTQ-related material in elementary schools. Elementary schools. So we're talking, pre-K through sixth grade, which they argue conflicts with their faith. So this is a coalition of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim parents. I think this is important, with elementary school children in Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland. And they brought a suit against the school board after the board introduced new LGBTQ books into the curriculum as part of the district's inclusivity agenda. Okay? So now, what these parents are asking for, the nut of this is, hey, if you're going to read these books out loud to the group, I don't want my kid in there. Because some of these books, they delve into topics of gender and sexuality that I don't think my child is ready for, or that don't comport with my religion. And by the way, if you're going to read out loud to a class of, second graders, couldn't we just read something else? Does it have to be about gender and sexuality? That seems to imply that there's an agenda here. Now, here's another important point. There's the sex and sex ed classes. I'll just shorten it to sex ed classes in this county. Parents can opt their kids out. So what do? The schools move this literature into just the general education, and they're saying, well, you can't opt out because we're going to have too many absences. First of all, that should tell you something. If you're going to have so many absences, maybe most of the parents don't want this stuff in their kids' classrooms because it's not age appropriate. So this is not only, in my mind, a religious rights story. This is a parental rights story. So you're going to hear now from Justice Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh, and he is talking to the attorney for the Montgomery County Public Schools, who is trying to say, we can't just have everyone opt out. But Justice Kavanaugh is saying, wouldn't that be better than actually dictating what you want to teach? We're not saying you have to take the materials out. We're saying let the kids out. Let's roll the tape, Misty.
The country has opt-outs for all sorts of things. The county has opt-outs for all sorts of things. The other Maryland counties have opt-outs for all sorts of things. And yet for this one thing, they changed in mid-year and say no more opt-outs. I'm just not understanding feasibility.
So again, I think what's in the record is that with respect to these books as they were deployed in the classroom, there was high absenteeism in some schools. For example, dozens of students being opted out in, I think Mr. Baxter said the average size of an elementary school in Montgomery County is 700 students. So each grade is 125. If you have dozens of students walking out, making arrangements for those students to have adequate space and supervision and alternative instruction, I think is infeasible.
But they do it for all sorts of other opt-outs.
They don't do it for all sorts of other opt-outs. There's a limited universe of things that students can opt out from. The Family Life and Healthy Sexuality curriculum stands alone. It is mandated by the state. It is something where you are able to predict precisely when the curriculum is going to be deployed. There's
It's the most similar substantively to what we have here, and there's an opt-out allowed there. I guess I'm not understanding why Montgomery County School Board stands alone. I think in the country. You can tell me if there's another school board that's done something like this.
I apologize.
Both the kind of books that are being used and prohibiting opt-outs. And I guess I'm just not understanding the whole goal, I think, of some of our religion precedents is to look for the win-win, to look for the situation where you can respect the religious beliefs and accommodate the religious beliefs while the state or city or whatever it may be can pursue its goals. And here, they're not asking you to change what's taught in the classroom. They're not asking you to change that at all. A lot of the rhetoric suggests that they might have, that they were trying to do that, but that's not what they're trying to do. They're only seeking to be able to walk out so that they don't have to, the parents don't have their children exposed to these things that are contrary to their own beliefs.
Okay. So the attorney for the school district is saying, hey, too many kids are opting out, and what do we do with the kids? Because we're putting these books in at a time where, I don't know, some classes may read them at 8 a.m., some classes may read them at 10 a.m., and then you have kids wandering the halls, and what do we do? I think the real win-win would be if you want to engage kids in reading or read-alouds, just go with some basic books that don't touch on gender and sexuality. There is an agenda here. There is an agenda because they know that parents can opt their kids out of that family health and sexuality class. Well, how else do we get these books in there then? How do we get these books in front of kids then? On the 5 last night, Jesse Waters put this in really good context and made it funny as well. Let's roll the 5 from last night.
It's more than just gay romance. Drag queens, F is for feather boa, I is for intersex. And they've managed to do something no one's ever done in the history of civilization: unite Jews, Muslims, and Catholics together under one banner. Now, when all of these people have fought wars and killed each other for centuries, maybe you realize you're doing something wrong. You're right. The teachers now have this guidance session where they will facilitate the conversation and answer questions to the students. What kindergartner has a question about cross-dressing? And do you trust a purple-haired woman with a nose ring and a trans flag on her desk to have an honest conversation with your kid? Absolutely not. What's scary here, Dana, is they're so adamant about this that they've gone all the way to the highest court in the land, and they've spent $1 million in legal fees. And their argument is this: if 1 or 2 people opt out, then the lesson doesn't work. Okay, so that's like saying if 2 guys get a doctor's note to get them out of gym class, and there's 48 out of the 50 kids still in gym, then gym doesn't work. That's a preposterous argument, and Alito, I cannot wait to read his opinion.
Well, it really puts it in some interesting framing there. But look, Jesse said 2 or 3 kids opt out. They're talking about maybe a dozen at a time. And what do we do? How do we accommodate these kids? Accommodation is the word of the day in public education. They're constantly accommodating kids for other things. I think the Supreme Court will rule for the parents in this case, and I think that hopefully will have a ripple effect. I'm not sure why pre-K, kindergarten, even up to 6th grade. I think of myself when I was in 6th grade. I think of my own 2 kids when they were in 6th grade. Why this is the appropriate literature. There's such this focus on gender ideology in places like academia. Why? And meanwhile, math and reading scores are plummeting. So could we maybe rearrange our priorities in public education? Now, Martha McCallum, also on Fox, I bring these clips to you because I think they're both relevant, spoke with Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation of Teachers. I am no fan of Randy Weingarten, and she didn't do any favors for herself last night. They were talking about this case. They were talking about plummeting scores on math and reading tests across the country. And it got heated, so heated that Randy Weingarten did this.
Actually, very difficult. Martha, sweetheart, listen to me.
Please don't call me sweetheart.
It actually does. I'm sorry. My bad. It actually does matter.
She called her sweetheart. That's one of the most demeaning things you can say to someone when you disagree. And it's patronizing. It's totally patronizing. It's disgusting. Now, she said, my bad. I don't know how Martha, she kept it together. You could see her temper was flaring. And I don't blame her. Listen, At the end of the interview, Randy Weingarten said, we want to teach the full person, not just reading and math. We want them to be their whole selves. We want them to be their whole selves too at home, which is why we don't want them cutting off parts of their body, why we want to have the influence over whatever kind of spiritual, sexual, gender ideology, the things that we value in our own homes. So it's really interesting that they're pushing this stuff. And yeah, they're pushing it. If you want to read aloud to a class of kids that young, does it really have to be like Puppy Pride or Pride Puppy? Pride Puppy is one of the books. Okay. Meanwhile, there's another story, and I don't have tape for this. I don't need tape for this. I got to tell you about this. Nike funding a study. I was flabbergasted by this, and I'm surprised it didn't come out earlier. So here it is. The New York Times published more than 10,000 words about former San Jose State volleyball player Blair Fleming over the weekend. Now, Blair Fleming is a biological male who is a trans woman who competes on the San Jose State volleyball team and really disrupted the entire league. But the New York Times decided to make a superhero out of this person. And by the way, San Jose State became one of the top teams in the conference because they had a biological male competing with them. And that matters because that biological male, even though they identify as a female, has certain advantages: arm length, vertical jump, power, strength. But buried deep in this New York Times story, and I'm reading from Outkick right now, buried deep inside the story was a single paragraph that should raise some eyebrows, not just raise some eyebrows. The author mentions Joanna Harper, a biological male who identifies as a woman and purportedly studies transgender athletes. It's important to note that Harper played an advisory role in the 2015 Olympics transgender decision, allowing males to compete in Women Olympics athletics with testosterone suppression. But that's not the interesting part. We haven't even got to the interesting part yet. Harper is currently helping to lead an ambitious study of trans adolescents. I just want to stop and note trans adolescents. That is your brain isn't fully formed. I say this all the time until you're 22, 25 years old. And as an adolescent, to give them puberty blockers or anything that makes them uncomfortable or, helps them prevent this discomfort of going through adolescence, that's just tragic to me. It's absolutely tragic. Harper is currently helping to lead an ambitious study of trans adolescents that measures their results on a 10-step fitness test before they start hormone therapy, and then after they have begun to medically transition every 6 months for 5 years. This is in the New York Times story. But she told me when we talked in February, the current climate makes the study somewhat uncertain. I assume she was referring to the Trump administration's cuts to National Institutes of Health research grants, but she said, money's not a problem. The study's being funded by Nike. The study's being funded by Nike. Nike has yet to take a stand for women. They put out ads that rely on the old sexist tropes of, you can compete. Yes, you can. People will tell you no, but you can't. Oh, that's so old. And they're funding this study that, and I guarantee you, the point of this study is to find that after males start transitioning biologically, going through the gender transition, that they lose their weakness. They lose their strengths. They lose their powerfulness. They lose their velocity. They lose their vertical jump. They're trying to prove that biological males should be admitted into female sports. That's what that's got to be the goal of this study. You think it's going to be honest when it's being conducted by a trans woman? who, by the way, helped in 2015, the Olympic Games, say, hey, yeah, let's bring in the male boxers. I just, another reason to not buy from Nike. Yeah. That's all I can say is when you are a customer of a line, understand what they do, what their side businesses are, where they source. And this is just, to me, a stain on Nike. By the way, Outkick and others have tried to contact Nike for comment. They're not commenting. What does that tell you? They're going to be on the wrong side of this. Also on the wrong side of this is the state of Minnesota, where I live. This is another state that's defying the Trump order to ban biological males from female sports. Women's sports, women have a division of their own so they can compete in a fair environment. And you open this door to saying, well, there's some boys who think they're girls, so they should compete against women. And then they dominate track events and they dominate whatever sport, volleyball. Oh, but it's really not happening that often. Really? Nike's funding a study to make sure it happens more. So Keith Ellison is the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. And he was asked about this state's defiance of the Trump order, the Minnesota willing to just say, no, we're going to let boys compete against girls. Let's run this interchange between a reporter and Keith Ellison.
I have a pretty specific question here. I'm curious. It's from a parent from the Moorhead School District who says a biological male recently took first place in the girls' triple jump and is now in the school records for 3 girls' events. No one wants to see kids bullied or denied opportunities, but is it fair to the girls who have trained hard only to lose out to athletes with clear biological advantages? From their perspective, couldn't this be considered a form of bullying?
Well, I'm at a disadvantage because that particular case I'm not aware of. I do know of other children in that school district who are, 10, 9, 11, and they don't really care about winning. They just want to be on the team. We're talking about kids who have always identified as female, never have identified any other way, and they just want to be on the team. And because they want to run and jump like all kids do. And so, the caller called in on that situation. I'll study that one. But the situation I do know about is a child who probably isn't going to win the race. Maybe they will, who knows? But they're not there for the purpose of, trophies and medals. They're there just because they want to be a member of the team and learn something about sportsmanship and teamwork and cooperation, and which is really the real lessons of sports.
Okay, first of all, I don't know about that case, he says. Second of all, I know about 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds who just want to compete. They just want to be a part of the team. They want to run and jump like kids. That's not what she was talking about. She's talking about competitive situations where girls are rightly competing against other girls, and then a boy comes in. Oh, they've identified as a boy their entire life. What are we going to do? Well, that's a lie. If they're in fact female, I'm sorry. You can identify. Hey, I identify as let's see who I like to identify as Jennifer Lopez. Not really, because I don't like her character very much. But for a day, I might want to look like her. That doesn't make me Jennifer Lopez. I'd like to identify as 29. I'd like to identify as a supermodel. Does that mean I'm going to get a job as a supermodel? No, it does not. Because I can't compete there. So I don't care how long you've identified and you want to run and jump. He's talking about 9 and 10-year-olds. We're talking about high school athletes who have scholarships on the line. And some guy comes in identifying as a female and takes the records away from these girls, takes their place on the podium. We have talked about this ad nauseum. It's ridiculous that we're still talking about this. But Keith Ellison, he's okay with it because they just want to belong and learn the lessons of sports. Then don't have them compete at the competitive level. Okay? If they just want to run and jump and play and be part of a team, then keep them out of competition where people who really want to compete for whether it's prize money or scholarships, get to compete. Okay, and on that note, over in the UK, and we talked about this earlier on this program, the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom has said they will only recognize to be women those born biologically female. Now, it's astonishing that we need a Supreme Court ruling to tell us this, but it sure is politically convenient for Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, because otherwise he couldn't possibly make a decision about without the codifying who's a woman and who's a man. He couldn't possibly make a decision about. He couldn't possibly know how to come down on this issue. Roll this interview with Keir Starmer and notice the cowardice and the squishiness of this man.
We saw protests this weekend in Bristol, as Paul mentioned, about the Supreme Court ruling. Do you believe a trans woman is a woman?
Look, I think the Supreme Court has answered that question.
So you don't believe a trans woman is a woman?
Look, a woman is an adult female, and the court has made that absolutely clear. I actually welcome the judgment because I think it gives real clarity. It allows those that have got to draw up guidance to be really clear about what that guidance should say. So I think it's important that we see the judgment for what it is. It's a welcome step forward. It's real clarity in an area where we did need clarity. I'm pleased it's come about. We need to move and make sure that we now ensure that all guidance is in the right place according to that judgment.
What are your words for the trans community who are worried about what this could mean for them?
Well, look, I think it is important that we have clarity about the law. That's what the Supreme Court is there for. So obviously that's an important and welcome step, and we go forward from there.
He really didn't answer the question about what would he say to the trans community. He used the word clarity multiple times because we weren't clear on this before. We weren't clear about XX versus XY. We weren't clear on that. Look, what this means, I think, to the trans community in the UK is that you can identify however you would like. But when it comes to life insurance, I don't know. Do they have life insurance in the UK? I don't know. They have national health. So everyone has to stand in line for 6 years to get a hip replacement. They take care of everybody in that way. So I'm not sure how that's going to affect these things. But I think all this says to the trans community is continue being who you are. But legally, your chromosomes tell us who you are. It's been that way for thousands and thousands of years. You know what else is true? All health starts in the gut. And if you're looking to do something better for your health, look no further than Kimchi One from Bright Core Nutrition. Now, Kimchi One packs all the fermented nutrition of kimchi into convenient capsules. And some of you who know that kimchi is nutritious, you know. But others, like I was learning about this, and I use this product now. This arms your gut with over 900 unique strains of probiotics supporting gut flora and digestion. I highly recommend it because all health starts in the gut, as I said. So putting the right fermented superfood in your gut improves every aspect of your health, from your skin and your hair to your mental performance. It's even been shown to reduce the risk of obesity and lead to smaller waistlines. Kimchi One is all natural. It's made in the USA. And it's non-GMO. And today you get an exclusive offer just for my listeners and viewers, 25% off with code Michele, Michele. Don't put that second L in there. Go to mybrightcore.com. You can see it there on your screen, mybrightcore.com/Michele. Or call my friends at Brightcore. You can get up to 50% off your order when you call them and free shipping. Give them a call now. It's 888-927-5980. 888-927-5980. One of their educated staff will make sure that Kimchi One is right for you. 888-927-5980 or go to mybrightcore.com/Michele. Back to the wild card. We'll get to this Maryland man, this dad, this nice MS-13 gang member who's been deported to El Salvador. And Chris Van Hollen, senator from Maryland, has made it his mission to make sure that this man comes back healthy in one piece, that he gets his due process. Now, I'm hearing so many legal analyses of this story that the Justice Department can change this thing with a stroke of a pen, or that they could bring him back and just deport him to a different country that is not El Salvador. Regardless, Chris Van Hollen is dying on this hill. And one of our favorite people, Louisiana Senator John Kennedy, has a response. So let's play those two cuts top to bottom.
Anybody who can't stand up for the Constitution and the right of due process doesn't deserve to leave.
Chris says Mr. Garcia's had no due process. He's been in front of 17 judges. Some of them twice. Probably $5 million worth of legal fees, and he hadn't had to pay it back. Unless you're next level obtuse, you know that Mr. Garcia is never coming back to the United States, ever.
Well, we will see about that. I mean, the Supreme Court of the United States of America has said that our government must facilitate his return. And then you have the president of El Salvador saying, nah, he's an El Salvadorian citizen. He's in our prison. We're keeping him there. He's a gang member. I wish this story would go away because it's such a political football. And I think most people, here's the problem with this whole due justice or due process argument made by those like Chris Van Hollen and others. They're making such a stink about this case, this due process. They didn't care about due process when these hundreds of thousands of people were coming across our border illegally. Many of them with fentanyl, many of them who later committed unspeakable crimes. That due process doesn't matter to them. But this guy, this Maryland man, this Maryland dad who beat his wife, they care about him. I mean, the optics are bad, but people who hate this administration, the Trump administration, are just going to go to town with this one. So I would suggest that the Trump administration do something quick and easy and simple and clean to either get him back and send him somewhere else, like Venezuela or Mexico, or understand that MS-13 is now a designated terrorist group and use that technicality to get him, to be deported on that basis. Let's shift gears a little bit to Bill Maher. We talked about Bill Maher before going and having dinner with Trump. Bill Maher has been a ridiculous critic. I only mean that he's not ridiculous. He has criticized this president to a ridiculous level. I mean, again and again. He used the Hitler, he used the fascist, he used all the words, right? But then someone convinced him to go have dinner. Kid Rock convinced him to go have dinner with the president. Bill Maher gave a monologue saying, boy, that was not what I expected in meeting Donald Trump. That he was not the monster I thought that he was, blah, blah, blah. Well, Larry David, who is famous for Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David, who also wrote and produced Seinfeld episodes, penned an op-ed for the New York Times, of course. He titled it, My Dinner with Hitler, and criticized Bill Maher for even taking the dinner. But what was his real aim? Was it just to critique Bill Maher? I don't know. Scott Jennings of CNN, whom I really like, had a pretty good argument for what Larry David was actually trying to achieve. Let's roll that tape.
The message of this is not to, because Bill Maher, first of all, I totally agree. He's totally in the right to do it. And I loved his monologue. Even though I disagree with most everything he believes politically, he was right to do this and he was right to speak out about it. But this isn't about that dinner. It's about the next one, because this is the modern left. It's an attempt always to intimidate people into not ever doing it again. It's to silence yourselves or we'll do it for you. That's the purpose of this op-ed, so that the next comedian or the next person on the American left chooses not to speak to Donald Trump. This is all an effort to get people not to do what you just said, which is to talk to each other in our political league.
I agree 1,000%. And I've said this time and time again, that on the left, they want to shout you down. They want to cancel you. They want to embarrass you, humiliate you, denigrate you in any way possible so that you'll shut up and you'll back down from your position and no one else will want to follow you. That was I'm telling you, this is one of the main reasons I left my previous career, Not because anyone did that to me, but because I saw it happening all over the place. And I thought, screw it. I don't care if people try to cancel me. I don't care if they disagree with me. I'm going to keep talking because this is insane. We can't have civil discussion about this. We can. And Bill Maher did. And then Larry David decided to call it My Dinner with Hitler. And Larry David hopes that he has enough influence to discourage anybody else from deigning to talk reasonably with the president of the United States. Do you remember when Donald Trump was running for president and Jimmy Fallon had him on the late night show and tousled his hair? And everyone said, "Oh, you humanized Donald Trump. You normalized him. How dare you? That's not what we do in Hollywood. That's not what we do in New York City. How dare you?" And Fallon, who just wanted to stay sort of in the middle, later had to go and apologize. And I guarantee you Trump will never appear on his show again. Heaven forbid he make the same mistake twice. Speaking of mistakes, we can talk a little bit about Harvard before we're done today. Harvard has a massive endowment. Still, they get federal funding. Why? Well, you know what? Harvard has a really good medical school, and perhaps the United States government thought, you know what? Let's help support some of your research. Even though you have a $53 billion endowment and you charge students up the wazoo. I mean, Harvard is the wealthiest university in America, which likely makes it the wealthiest university on the planet. As some people call it, a hedge fund with a university attached. So what we found out about Harvard, also, in addition to receiving our taxpayer dollars, I'm sure you're thrilled to know that all these Ivy League schools are getting federal funding. Your money out of your paycheck is going to help support this. Now, you could say, yeah, I'd like my money to go to some of this study. You know what? You can donate on your own to Harvard or Brown or Princeton, Yale. You can do that on your own. You can go get your checkbook or your Venmo and send them some money. But trust me when I tell you, probably half of Americans don't want their money going to these universities when these universities are privately funded by billions of dollars and funded by foreign governments. Now, this isn't a new story. This is an old story. But now it's in much deeper focus because of where we are with Harvard and the Ivies, with their anti-Semitism that some people call systematic or systemic, with the protests that they've allowed, the disruption of Jews to study on campus in favor of these pro-Palestinian protests. Well, you know what? Maybe that's because they get a lot of their money from countries that hate Jews. I'm going to run this piece for you. This is a compilation of stories from 2020 and 2021 when we were deep in the heart of COVID on where Harvard gets a lot of its money. Roll the tape, Misty.
Both Harvard and Yale are among the colleges under investigation for failing to report hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign gifts. The U.S. Department of Education is leading this investigation. Officials say they've uncovered more than $6 billion in unreported gifts from countries including Qatar, China, and Saudi Arabia.
Harvard failed to properly report hundreds of millions of dollars worth of gifts and foreign contracts. And this comes just weeks after a prominent Harvard scientist, Charles Lieber, was arrested on charges that he lied to federal authorities about his ties to China. Well, the federal agency sent Harvard a letter this week requesting information about foreign ties and funding. They're zeroing in on countries including China, Saudi Arabia, and Russia.
An official report from Harvard University is revealing the extent of Jeffrey Epstein's ties to that college. The review, completed at the request of Harvard's president, found the disgraced financier maintained his own personal office, with unlimited access on campus for a decade after his 2008 conviction. It also confirms Epstein, who donated millions to the school before serving time for soliciting sex with a minor.
Harvard grew its endowment to more than $53 billion in the latest fiscal year. The endowment's management company says public and private stock markets drove that growth. Harvard is the nation's wealthiest university. It ended the fiscal year in June with a $283 million operational surplus.
Okay. So real quick, let me just give you an aside here. Let's cut out before that like, share, follow thing, okay, Misty? So just give it, yeah, great. Okay, awesome. Okay. So Harvard took money from Jeffrey Epstein, from China, from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, and from you. So while Harvard plays the victim here, oh, you're trying to tell us what we can and cannot teach in our curriculum. It's more like, maybe you should protect Jewish students more often and better. And, maybe you should have some fairness in your admissions. Harvard is at the heart of a number of scandals for a reason. And they have this image of being Harvard. So I love, people on the left, liberal people who call themselves disruptors because they want to break things down and rebuild them again. Let's disrupt Harvard. How about that? Just because the institution has been around forever and has all that money doesn't mean that they're right. And it doesn't mean that taxpayers should fund them. No university is entitled to taxpayer dollars. Certainly not private ones. And finally, we leave you with this. It's kind of a similar note. The Bill Gates Foundation. Now, Bill and Melinda Gates had their foundation together. They're divorced now, whatever. It's the Gates Foundation. And we'll show you this graphic. Some deep diving shows that NPR, National Public Radio, again, a federally funded entity, took $24.6 million from the Bill Gates Foundation. The Guardian took $12.9 million from the Bill Gates Foundation. NBC reportedly took $4.3 million from the Bill Gates Foundation. I wonder how you donate to a network like that. I'd love to see more info on this. BBC took $3.6 million from the Bill Gates Foundation. CNN took $3.6 million from the Bill Gates Foundation. Now, if you're taking money from something or someone, that's going to influence how you present that person's point of view. When advertisers who legitimately pay for ads don't like what your show is doing, they pull the ads. Talked to Bill Maher about that. Remember after 9/11 when he said the 9/11 pilots were the brave ones because they flew themselves into buildings? His show, he was nearly done. So many advertisers just withdrew, and then he had to sort of remake himself. So, if you are a media entity and you take money from a foundation, you're likely going to do the bidding of that foundation. And I think it's pretty apparent. CNN, BBC, NBC, The Guardian, and NPR all have a particular bent. And maybe that's part of the reason. Maybe. I think it's worth looking into. All of this is to say, don't hesitate to speak out. Don't hesitate to go against the grain. Be brave. Do good. There are people who will stand with you. Find them. Find your coalition of courage. And let's all be brave and do good together. Thanks for listening. We will see you next time. Hey, you can keep up with the Trump administration when you subscribe to the Trump Report. It's an email that brings you daily highlights from the Oval Office right to your inbox 5 days a week. Subscribe today at SalemPodcastNetwork.com/Trump.